Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, instructors, and I thought we could talk a little bit today about, kind of the instructor's role and how I approach training instructors when I want to add them, to my portal and stuff. And I got a document from one of the districts I work with that they said I could share. And it outlines the exact process they go through with their instructors before they even give them the role, so that they know that they're comfortable with using the system. And, they've modified that document each year, and they have a lot of success with their instructors, with getting sign-in sheets back and understanding how everything works, since they've put on this real intentional process when it comes to instructors and their PD system. So, like usual and always, feel free to interrupt me if I'm not making sense, or if you want to ask a question, you don't have to wait till the end. You can interject at any time. Like I said, most of you are muted. Feel free to unmute yourself and say whatever you need to, or use the chat feature and I can share your question with the group if need be. But yes, thank you for joining me. Happy New Year, all that good stuff. Okay, so the instructor. In becoming an instructor, there's really a couple of things that should be done before you actually assign that role to the user's account. One is, have them go to their profile page and they check that box, which registers them to be an instructor, which then shows them the instructor tab, and we want them to complete that, and we'll talk about that a little more in detail in a second. And then I highly urge and encourage, before you add that role, to do some type of training or give them some type of instruction on what it means to be an instructor within your system and what are their responsibilities going to be as an instructor. And like I said, districts that are real intentional and do that have a lot less issues down the line with their courses. So after those three things are done, then I would add the role to their account. Let's look at that a little more in detail. So when you go to the profile or to My Records personal information, there's a little box at the bottom that says register to be an instructor. When they check it and save, a couple things happen. One, an email gets sent to whoever's designated the PD manager in your system. And then the second thing that happens is the instructor info tab appears in My Records. And we want them to go in and complete that tab. And the main reason is, if you read the WAC, in section 3 of 181, 85, 200, it says all in-service education instructors shall have academic or professional experience which specifically qualifies them to conduct an in-service education program. So that little tab kind of covers that. They can either upload, their resume, or they can show, I consider myself knowledgeable in special education or whatever. So we give them options to choose from. And that's kind of why that tab is there. That's to kind of cover and satisfy that portion of the WAC, just so you're in compliance. Not everybody does that, because the district, choose to have other means of showing why someone's qualified to be an instructor, but that is why within the system that tab is there. I'd like to tell you the why. We don't just randomly put things in. There's usually a reason, and we do our best to be in compliance with the WACs. So if you have questions, let me know, but that's kind of the why behind that tab. So after they do that, like I said, I encourage that you provide them some type of training before you actually give them the instructor role. And every district handles training differently, and even every district has different expectations of what they want their instructors to do. So I'm going to kind of outline an example of what your training, or what, those expectations that you want to share with your instructors might look like. And then I'll send you some sample documents as well that I got from a couple districts. But ultimately, remember that we on the support team are here to support districts in that process. So, we can help provide that training if needed, or we will help you create a training protocol if you need us to. So after the instructor completes the role, then the PD manager adds or completes the training. The PD manager adds the role. Sorry, I just want to remind you when that role is added, they get new tabs added to their account. So when a typical employee, when they log into their PD account, they're going to see course registration tab, they're going to see their My Records tab, and they're going to see frequently asked questions, the FAQ tab. But when you give them the instructor role, all of a sudden the course request tab is going to appear so they can submit course requests. The instructor tab is going to show up so they have all the functions that are specific to instructors. And then they also see the management tab, but the only thing they see on the management tab is that invite, register, cancel tool. And some districts ask us to hide that particular piece. We can work with you to modify that if you don't want them to have access to registering people. That's kind of the general process when you add that role. So it's okay for them to, register and complete that little instructor tab within their records. And if you never want to give them the instructor role, that's okay, because they're not going to have access to anything even though they've requested to be an instructor. They don't get access until you give them the role. And that confuses some people, but just wanted to, hopefully that clarifies things a little. Okay, so I look at professional development kind of as a process or a cycle, and it begins with the course request, and it always ends with awarding credit. And then there's all these things that kind of happen in between, and they don't necessarily happen in this order. They can kind of go back and forth, but the beginning is the course request and the end is the credit. Typically a course is submitted, it's approved, then you have your participants register, and then the day of the class shows up, so you print your sign-in sheet. After the class is done, you go in and you award credits, you verify who showed up and how many hours, and then sometime between here and here, the participants go in and complete their electronic evaluation. So that's kind of the process of PD. And, like I said, these things in between can kind of go back and forth. They don't have to go in the same order, but sometimes it's good to show your instructors, kind of give them a visual of how it works. So this is the kind of simplest way I could come up with that. And I will also share my PowerPoint with everybody today if you're interested. Okay, so course request. When it comes to training instructors, it's really important for them to know where to go and what to do when it comes to course requests, because that's where everything starts. Not all districts let instructors submit their own course requests, but most do. So, I think, take your time and, train them on that process. And that's usually where the bulk of all your training time takes place. Because if you can get them to submit a good course request and to understand all the pieces, it makes the life of the PD manager much easier, and it eliminates issues later on. So if they really understand what the credits mean and sessions and seat counts and all those little details, it helps in the end. Probably 90% of all PD, when there's a problem with a course, like with registration or anything, it usually is tied somehow to something on the course request. That's why I think it's important to really take your time and be intentional when you're showing instructors this part of the system. On the first section, I always let them know that, you need to set aside a little bit of a time here because the page will time out after a certain period of time. So I say, make sure you've got a good 30 minutes set aside to get this first page done. I always encourage them, make sure you've got your description, agenda, objections, all those things figured out before you even start. It just makes the process easier. And even though, there's 7 or 8, because I have one district that has 8 sections that need to be completed, all you have to do to get the process started is to finish the first page. and I remind them that anything that's required will be marked in red, and that the little blue info icons are throughout the whole page will hopefully give them a little more information if they don't understand what it's asking for. And that's a good thing as a PD manager. You might want to look on your site to make sure that all those little info flyout menus are the right description or information help, especially because districts do things a little differently. And if they're not, we can either show you where to go to edit those, or we'll make the edits for you to try to make it as user-friendly for your users as we can. Of course, there's a lot more to Section 1, but those are I'm just kind of highlighting the key things that I would, when I'm conducting a training, go over. I always like to explain them like, okay, so on Section 2, this is where the criteria associated with the course lives. And it's kind of a twofold purpose, this page. It lets participants search for data when they're registering. We've got some search options on the course registration page, but it's also a great resource for districts to keep track of what they're doing. Like maybe they have grants that they need to provide data for. So it lets them, it's just a data tool. I also remind them that, they have to pick at least one item from each drop down. They can put more if they want to, and then I show them how to delete them if they need to, but just let them know that that's how that particular page works. And then on to page 3, the limits. And, I let them know right away that this is an optional page. You don't have to set limits, and I explain to them what the limits mean. If you're limiting by location, only people that have that location picked in their personal information will see the register button. And if you're a district that uses PD groups, we kind of talk about what do PD groups mean. An example is maybe you have it set so all of your administrative positions belong to an administrative PD group. So if you pick administrators, only people that have an administrative position will see the register button and nobody else will see it. They'll see the course, but they can't register because they don't have that like position that's tied to that PD group. Okay, course request Section 4, credits. And so I let them know, this is where we document the number of credits or hours available for the course. And then I remind them, if you're giving a course for clock hours, you got to have a minimum of 3 hours. And then I like to explain to them what that auto-populate checkbox means. And, I tell them that when you check that, it automatically adds the number of credits during registration so that the user doesn't have to. And then, if you're a district that's offering multiple credits at the same time, I talk about how that's where you probably wouldn't use auto-populate, or you would pick the most likely scenario if you're going to use auto-populate. You don't want to auto-populate both credit types, because then when you go to the grading screen, everybody's going to be listed twice. And I know that causes a lot of confusion for districts, because they think, oh no, they registered twice, when really they've just got 2 credit types listed. Hopefully that makes sense. Materials, I let them know, this is a completely optional tab. I do know that some districts like to maybe upload their agenda so they can make it really pretty with bullets and formatting and stuff, instead of, putting the agenda on the first page. This is just a place to put any handouts that you might want your participants to have. And I let them know, you can add stuff to this tab later if you need to. It doesn't have to be done now. That's one that they can go in and add to later. And then same with Fix. We talk about, rather than handouts, this is for your websites and links or any YouTube videos or anywhere you're going to go on the web. You can add those links to this tab. And then, of course, Course 7 is our Sessions tab. And this is a big one, and we want to make sure they understand that you need to provide the details. So this is the when are you meeting? Where are you meeting? How many seats are we going to have available? All those little tiny details for each session. And it's really important if you have a multiple session class so they know all the specific dates and times you're meeting. And I let them know, if it's a single session, you only add 1 session and it lets you continue. But if it's a multiple session, you have to put in at least 2 sessions in order to go to the next page. When, you know, I like to show them how to copy a session to kind of, you know, save time, especially if the seats and the location and the times are going to be the same. The copy button's really handy. And then I like to point out that, you know, things have to go in sequence. There's a sequence field, and it needs to start with 1 and go in sequential order. You can't start with 5 or whatever. Otherwise, it runs into some weird issues when it comes to printing your sign-in sheets. Because if it's not sequential, it can't find it, and then people get really frustrated. Of course, I only have 1 district right now that uses tab 7, so I didn't put it in my PowerPoint, but that is if you have any payment options, and, you know, explain to them what the different payment options are, you know, if it's a pay, no pay, and all that. And I didn't put it in my PowerPoint, but I can help provide, you know, directions if that district wants it. Okay. So after we talk about course requests, you know, then I explain to them how, you know, participants will go and register and everything. But then I like to show them, you know, how they can communicate with people who've signed up for their classes. So I teach them how to use the email section of the PD system. So I show them where to go and how to find their class, and I show them how to type up an email. You may or may not want to teach them how to attach files to emails. And if you guys need some instruction in that, I can do that. I've actually made a little YouTube video that you can share with instructors too on how to attach a file to an outgoing email through the PD system. And, you know, I show them how to type their email message and what to press to send it. Pretty simple. And after I go over email, I like to teach them about, you know, printing their sign-in sheets. That's kind of a big deal. You know, one nice feature of electronic registration is that you get nice sign-in sheets out of the deal with people's names printed on them that are legible rather than, you know, people just writing their names in. So I teach them where to go in the system and how to select their sign-in sheets. You know, and most districts have a couple variations of sign-in sheets, like a single session and a multi-session. And while I'm in this same area, I point out, you know, this is where you can go to read your evaluation summary after the course is done, you know, to get your feedback on the course from your participants, or to see who has and hasn't completed their evaluation yet. And, you know, and talk about any of the other reports that they have access to, like transcripts or anything like that. So I just try to get them familiar with that particular area within the system. And then I like to move on to, you know, say in a perfect world, participants register themselves, but sometimes that doesn't happen, or sometimes as the instructor, you want to be really selective to who gets into your course. So we teach them about the invite, register, cancel tool, and, you know, you guys know that real well. So I didn't put a ton of information here, but I go through that with them, and I show them, and I explain what the difference between inviting versus registering means, and talk to them about what does the cancel portion mean, and we'll walk through that scenario. So then when we get to, I guess I'm skipping ahead, but when you get to, you know, grading, then they know if someone signed in on the sign-in sheet but didn't register, how to add people so that they can verify that attendance without having to bug you guys for help. And that's in a perfect world. And I know that districts that take the time to really teach their instructors on this tend to have a little better success with them correctly completing their attendance verification. I like to talk to them about what do we do if I need to add seats to my class. And this is where I really hammer into them that once the class is open, you never touch tab 7 of the course request. If you want to add seats, you need to come here. And we talk about how when you come here, it does the math for you, for one, and two, it sends out the automated emails. So if I have a class that's got a wait list and I want to add seats so that I can move those people in the wait list, by using the course utilities, the system automatically moves the people in and sends out an email letting them know, and it adjusts and does the math. So I walk them through that. And I also remind them, you know, if it is a multiple session class, you need to repeat the steps for each session that you want to add seats to. So, you know, I kind of, you know, everybody assumes to add seats to a class to go to the course or go to tab 7 of course request. But that really only works if the class hasn't been open for enrollment yet. All right. And then one thing that I spend a lot of time is, what do you do after the class, after your course is done with my instructors? What are you responsible for? You know, and this may vary slightly from district to district, but ultimately, you know, I let them know that they need to review that sign-in sheet, make sure, you know, that people that signed in but didn't register get registered. Either, you know, ask them to do it before they leave or do it for them with Invite Register. You know, and as an instructor, if they want the credit added on their transcript, if they want to receive clock hours, they also need to register for the class and sign the sign-in sheet. You know, they have to kind of follow the same suit as the participants. And then, you know, since they're the ones who's actually there teaching the class, we encourage them to review the information on the sign-in sheet for accuracy, you know, hours, dates, all that stuff, you know, because they were there, we weren't. Because that sign-in sheet is really our proof that the people were there and they earned the credits. And then I talked to them about, you know, completing attendance or verifying attendance, and we'll go over that in the next slide, how, you know, in a perfect world, and I know not every district does this, the instructor goes in and does that first. And then the PD department really is just the second set of eyes, and they, you know, just check for, you know, accuracy. And then we go over the importance of sending those original sign-in sheets to the PD office and why it's important, you know. That way, you know, we can notify them to complete their evaluation, and we can promptly post or award credits for participants. You know, if we're waiting on a sign-in sheet, that last step doesn't get done. And it can make participants cranky if they're, you know, especially if they're really needing those hours for maybe renewal for a contract or certificate renewal. So, you know, we talk about how it all fits in the big scheme and why it's important that they're prompt and timely and their responsibilities. I also like to remind them, you know, during that last class, the last session, towards the end, to take a few minutes and remind their participants to complete their evaluation. And most people have a phone with them, a smartphone nowadays, and, you know, give them 5 minutes there in the class to, and remind the participant that you know, evaluation is an expectation if they want to get those credits. Districts that have made a point of doing that tend to have excellent evaluation returns. I have one district that's kind of protocol, that last 5 minutes, and they have about a 90–95% evaluation success rate. Of course, there's always people that either are retiring and don't care, or they're, you know, we still have a few golden certificates out there, so they don't need the clock hours. But it's, you know, it's encouraging to see that over time, participants are getting more used to that evaluation step and they're getting it done. And it really helps when you have instructors that are on board that encourage and help facilitate that process. You know, I go over verifying attendance, you know, and I show them where to go and how to do it. You know, I talk to them about the 1, 2, 3 process, you know, marking complete, editing the exceptions, and marking grading complete. And I kind of tell them what happens, you know, we mark no-shows, and, you know, they can put in notes and all that stuff. And then when they press that last button, it's really important because, one, it changes the status from open to grades in. But the most important thing is that's the only time that those participants really get a digital email reminder to do the evaluation. And if they're waiting to do it, you know, if they're not doing that attendance, you know, fairly soon after the course is over, they're not going to get that reminder email soon enough to remember to do their evaluation. And then again, you know, hammering them that they've got to turn in their attendance rosters to the PD office. All right. It may be helpful for your instructors or not to know a little bit about, you know, the statuses, of course. Sometimes, you know, I review with them that, you know, what, you know, open versus grades in, complete, all those different things mean, you know, but that's up to you if you care or not. Another part I really like to talk to them about when I'm doing a training with them is remind them about the resources tab. So on every PD site, under the on the instructor menu, there's a tab called resources, and this is where their directions live. You know, some of the directions we have embedded on the different pages, like on course requests before you go in, the course request instructions are typically embedded on each site. Same with on the, you know, verifying attendance, there's embedded instructions. But here is also where they can go, and most districts have at least these resources, if not a few others. You know, so kind of talking about, you know, how to complete a course request, how to use the invite register, explaining course utilities like adding seat counts, emailing and attendance, all those things live here. And so I just make sure they're comfortable so they know where to look for answers if the PD, you know, personnel aren't available at that time. You know, so if they're working late at night and they want to get stuff done, they have the power to answer a lot of their own questions by knowing where to go in the site. So that's kind of how I handle instructors and their responsibilities. Does anybody have any questions? I don't know if that was helpful or not. I will email out, here's one of the samples of, this is what they do in Vancouver. This is what the PD manager has created there, and she goes over all these little things with them. You know, she makes sure, they sit down with her actually, and she makes them go through a training with her before she gives them the role. She makes sure they know how to log in. She talks to them about that instructor tab, you know, and goes through course requests, and there's, you know, goes through all this. And so if you're interested, I will send you this. It's an 8-page document. I can send it to you. Of course, Vancouver does a few wacky things that, you know, right away wouldn't apply to you guys, but she's willing to let me share this document with you, and then I'll send it in Word form. So if it would be helpful, you can take it and make changes so it's more applicable to your district's process. I've got another, I'll actually probably send the version we made for Battleground that's a little different to give you ideas of how people are training their instructors, sorry. It's been a long morning already. It's only 10:30. So any questions, thoughts, things that I should have gone over that I missed? I know you're muted, so feel free to unmute yourself. And if not, that's kind of all I had today. I hope this is helpful. You know, I don't know what kind of, you know, how you guys are doing your individual instructor trainings. And if you know, if you want to have a chat with either Deb and I about, you know, training, or if you want us to set up some trainings, you know, that's what we're here for. We're always happy to help.